Eradicating and getting rid of all those invasive plants and pests might not be the best way to a rich biodiversity on your farm or in your garden. There might be better ways, like including your invasives or rethinking how the invasives are interacting and contributing to your environment. Allen Clements from Gnomewood Farm shares with us how he approaches invasives. And it's a little bit different than just getting rid of them. And he's found it contributes to the biodiversity of his farm. So I invite you to have an open mind heading into this conversation, because the way Allen talks about invasives, it might be different than anything you've heard before. Enjoy this conversation, and thank you for carving out the time and space to join us for the Soil Summit. And thank you for the incredible work that you are doing as a steward of the earth, regenerating soil and growing food consciously. Enjoy this conversation with Allen Clements. Tell me where your journey with biodynamics began.
Okay, great. Yeah. I had made a lot of friends in the central Pennsylvania area that were into permaculture and regenerative agriculture. And these friends sort of orbited around the Horn Farm Center for Agricultural Education, which is this awesome place just a few miles down the road from me now, that is really studying a lot of regenerative agriculture on old farmland and basically converting a lot of it to more perennial agriculture, more sustainable, more regenerative, finding crops that are useful from perennial agriculture, and testing methods of rapid reforestation, having a CSA, plant sales, all kinds of classes. And what ended up happening is a friend of mine asked me said that I should take a class that the Horn Farm Center was offering. And that was Dave Jackie's forest garden design class. And he knew I was interested in it. I was an avid gardener, just kind of enjoyed all of those things and just trying to learn as much as I could without actually having had taken a PDC. And I took that class and just like sort of broke me wide open, and just let all those cracks, let all the light in, so to speak, in the end. Kind of before that, we had moved to a little town called Marietta on the river. So like this really cool relationship of just being a few blocks from the river, the Susquehanna River. And it was also right across the street, the house that we bought, from the Susquehanna Waldorf School. So through our proximity, we ended up sending a couple of our kids there. My wife ended up becoming a Waldorf teacher. We became, we jumped onto an anthroposophical path, which, for those that don't know, anthroposophy is the sort of spiritual science that is the root of both Waldorf education and biodynamic farming, and anthroposophical medicine and all kinds of other wonderful things. So when I was reading like some very like low level stuff about biodynamics, I would share it with my wife, and my wife would be like, "Oh my gosh, that's just like child development, right? Like the Waldorf education, and like it overlays, and there's these different temperaments, and then there's the elementals, and you can actually relate those to that, and there's just so many layers." And we just had such a good time with this. And one year when she was doing her ongoing Waldorf teacher certification, she brought home a pamphlet for the Pfeiffer Center, which was part of that threefold community. It was Sunbridge, Waldorf education, teacher education, as well as the Pfeiffer Center for biodynamic study. And she said, "You should take this. You should do it." And I said, "Well, it's like a year long. Like, we're parents. We're both employed. Like, how are we going to do this?" She's like, "Figure it out. Let's do it." So, about a weekend a month, I would go up to the Pfeiffer Center, do intensive training there, bring it home, do more work, talk with a couple of biodynamic farmers I knew in the area, and just that's really how I identify now, is a biodynamic farmer or biodynamic gardener that also incorporates, a lot of things that I've learned about permaculture and regenerative agriculture through other venues.
That's awesome, Alan. And tell me, what were you doing when you discovered biodynamics?
It's work that I still do. I'm a filmmaker, and I have made many documentary films, hundreds of commercials and stories about businesses as well. And up until actually just a little over a year ago, I was working, at a film company, and I ended up being recruited by a sustainable company called RoofMax. And so now I get to make stories about their sustainable product, which is super awesome because I often struggled with having to make basically advertisements for poisons and things like that, from time to time, right? Things that did not align with my values. So I feel very fortunate that they found me, and they found me through my YouTube channel. So I should say that as I was like kind of learning, and as I'm still learning about all of this stuff, I like to document the projects of others that are doing permaculture, regenerative agriculture, biodynamics, you name it. So I have a whole YouTube channel under Forest Ranch Regenerative, which may be maybe what you had originally seen about my work. And I think doing that just, was just a great educational experience for me. And then I'm able to share some of those really inspirational projects with other people too.
Yeah, I found you through other means, but I eventually
Okay.
found that YouTube channel is fantastic. And it so much of what you said resonated with me, and what we wanted to amplify here in the Soil Summit. So I'm deeply grateful that you created this space to have this conversation. And one of the other pieces, Alan, is that now you have your own farm. It's how many acres is it?
It's 13 acres. Yeah. And
A lot of
I'm just
forest.
a lot of woods. And it's super interesting because, through what I've learned, I mean, if I hadn't learned what I've learned so far in regenerative agriculture, I would have thought what all the neighbors around here think about this piece of land, that it's
Oh,
useless because it's not all arable land.
right. So tell me, okay, with the mindset of that, not knowing what you know now, how might you have gone in and approached farming this 13 acres? Would you have cut down the trees, or would you have?
Honestly, you can't. I basically would have passed it by, you know what I mean? Which would have been terribly unfortunate because this is the absolute most beautiful place in the world. And, again, I wouldn't have seen the economic viability in the forest hillside. And it is important, economics, of course, because it's an energy flow just like any other. It's one that we have to live in. But as it stands, I have over 200 mushroom logs in the woods already, which is just the absolute perfect place for it. There's a creek that runs nearby. I can fill water tubs with that. I'm like mushrooms, forest grown medicinals. I'm actually a Cajun, which is a descendant of the French Acadians, and gumbo is a staple of our diet, and I have to make my own gumbo up here. But the sassafras leaf is something that grows very abundantly on this land. And so I plan to harvest, dry, and package my own gumbo filet, among other things. And on the little bit of pasture that we have a few Icelandic sheep, which will certainly multiply. And since my wife is a Waldorf educator, and handwork is such an important part of particularly the early childhood for which she teaches, we'll be able to use the own, organically and biodynamically grown wool from our Icelandic sheep for her children to do felting with and other crafts. So there's all kinds of good stuff going on here.
Yeah, that's really cool. Let's dive into one of the words that you just mentioned in that, like, land acknowledgement and the acknowledgement of our elders, which is invasives, and our beliefs and our ideas around invasives, and how you've come to see them differently, and tying that into biodynamics and the philosophy and practice of biodynamics.
Yeah, that's great. I'll start with just kind of a couple of things that happened as we came onto the land here, and that we observed and that we did. And I guess in some cases maybe even wish we didn't do, already. So there's a small pasture up on the hill here. And as I mentioned, we sheep is something that we wanted to do. And in that pasture were these very large, just tangles, like very tight tangles of Japanese bittersweet. And I like to frame them as exotics now, is something that I'm kind of trying to do, right? But people will call it an invasive vine.
Is that
And
the same? Sorry to cut you off. Is bittersweet the
yeah,
same as knotweed, or is it different?
it's different than knotweed.
Okay.
So bittersweet is kind of it's got a smooth bark on it. It can get about maybe, I don't know, an inch and a half diameter after several years, but for the most part, you're going to find a lot of small vines. It finds its way up into the branches of trees. Kind of grows along with them. Eventually very much choking them out in terms of photosynthesis and other things. Other issues can even pull them to the ground to some extent. So basically this very tight knot of bittersweet, and I want to say covering like maybe as maybe 50 square yards or maybe even 100 square yards of pasture in a couple of different places. And so a neighbor of mine, a very nice guy, said, that if we wanted to, he had a bush hog and he could come with his tractor and take care of some of that. And we said, yeah, let's do that. We'll make sure we'll give you an apple pie or something as thanks, because we really, A, we didn't have any equipment, and B, we really kind of, I'm really very much into handwork, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. I'm not kind of into as much of the tractors and large, pieces of machinery. But he came and he did that. And we were like, let's create this disturbance, right? Let's do it with intention, and then kind of like back off and see what happens. So, as he's cutting these away, we realized that there are a number of trees in the brambles, particularly young black cherry and mulberry, which are two things that we love to eat, especially my young daughter Iris. She'll eat any berry you put in front of her. Got to be careful. And so I was like, first I was just like amazed, and like I was like, we have a black cherry and mulberry orchard now. So it was just kind of a wonderful thing. So as he's cutting, I'm like, wait, hold on, let's think about this a little bit. If you can mow in between the trees, he's like, yep, I got it. And he was very masterful in like identifying where the trees were as he was going and cutting the brambles around it. And so when he was done, the place looked like an absolute wreck, right? There's like, all kinds of things sticking up out of the ground, bittersweet vine, and all kinds of pieces. And there was some other stuff in there, multiflora rose and raspberries and things like that. So I was just kind of looking at these trees, and it looks very garbagey, like very bad, in a contemporary sense, I should say. But I knew that after that disturbance had kind of healed over and other things had grown back, and maybe we do continue to put a little pressure on them, that things would look better over time. So come as we're living on the land and observing things, we're noticing that there's an intense deer population here. Very intense. And that, not to go on too much of a tangent, of course, is a result of the invasive species called humans getting rid of the wolf, because we didn't want our babies to live next to wolves, right? So, this thing that we did, has created a huge deer population that, of course, leads to all kinds of predation, like a ton of pressure on forests and trees. And many of these trees in my beloved new black cherry and mulberry orchard have been rubbed to death by buck. And the revelation there, and the thing that I kind of sat there and meditated on as I just sat in the field and looked at these trees that had been completely demolished, was that the bittersweet was the fence. And that without that, none of these trees, it was also the shelter of the bird that dropped the seed, the black cherry seed and the mulberry seed. But without this bittersweet, these trees would not even be here. And when I removed them, many of the trees were killed by other natural forces. And so it's just a very simple example of how, I guess another way to put it is like, imagine going into a culture, say my home of Louisiana, a friend of mine commented about how people will move there and they'll want to change things before they understand it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that is a huge part of what I'd love to share today when I'm learning, in many cases, the hard way, about changing things before I fully understand them.
So stop, pause, watch, listen, be the observer before forging ahead. And would you say this is something to do on like new land, or when would you apply that philosophy?
Yeah, anytime you arrive somewhere new, and I think as designers, which many of us are, and I'm sure many other people viewing are, maybe a permaculture designer or otherwise, I mean, that's our job, is to go onto land and with very little process, very little research, make some decisions and choices and opinions about it, right?
Yeah.
So
Would you have left that hedge? It sounds like it was almost like a hedge, or would you have created more of a hedge of that bittersweet then, leaving the orchard in place?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, it would certainly have to be managed if I wanted the trees to survive, right? It's a balance. And that's, I think, kind of, what I want to talk about and what I want to bring is just balance, the idea of balance. So, I have these little, just hand pruners, but I call them my goat, it's like a goat, right? So like if you had goats, right, you could bring them in there and they'd eat up a whole field of brambles or whatever. This is my little goat mouth, right? That I'm like, but I'm being more specific with it. You've probably seen living hedges before.
Well, yeah, and what's coming to mind is my parents have an organic, and family have organic biodynamic farm in Chilliwack, BC, and we're talking the other farmers are pristine. Like there's not a blackberry are invasive species out there, and they grow like crazy. You just they'll cover 10 acres if you leave them to go on their own, or even more. They're very evasive, very aggressive, and very frowned upon. And on our farm, they're the living hedgerows along the ditches and along the edges of the farm, and it's also where we get our berries to bring to market and to make into jams and juices and all the things. Eat fresh.
Yeah, that's great. That's beautiful, and that's a vision that I kind of have. I mean, I should, as a caveat, I should say, like, I don't, I'm not saying that anyone should go and plant necessarily invasives or like, encourage them in ways that would be unsavory. But I would say it's more of a matter of like being more creative with our management of them, and the fact, I think also just acknowledging that they're here to stay. I mean, do you know of an invasive species that has been eradicated successfully? I don't. I think if you just, and to your blackberry example, anyone who's watching this, your forests, fields, and your edges are filled with painful, annoying, edible, life-giving, shelter-providing, medicinal, ecological, niche-filling invasive species. Think about that,
Yeah, let that sink in. Let that sink in. And it's true. Like what you're saying is so true, Ellen. And that's one of the things I love about biodynamics, is really looking at the system as a complete whole, right? The farm as a complete organism, a complete like orchestra, basically, and the farmer being that conductor. And when I moved out to Saskatchewan, I grew up kind of eating wild edibles like dandelion and chickweed and lots of different things, stinging nettle. And but it was never part of my, like, I don't know, like daily beingness. Whereas when I moved out to Saskatchewan, our growing season is really short. So it takes us, if we don't have a greenhouse or cold frame, you're not eating fresh food until the middle of July, maybe August, if it's late freeze. And so the last couple of years, I've been hungry to figure out ways to eat fresh food earlier in the season, and I've gone towards eating the indigenous foods that are growing wildly around this 20-acre piece of property that I am so gifted to be a part of. And that's eating things like burdock and thistle and things that I never would have eaten before. And because stinging nettle's not really ready until like probably the end of July as well. But the other like mallow, there's a whole bunch of things that's come up early that are completely edible that you can put in salads, put in soups.
Do you have the garlic mustard there?
You know, I haven't found any yet.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure there might be some in one of the forests. Like, we don't really have forests. I have some hedgerows and some groves of trees. I haven't found any yet, but I'm on a mission to find it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And yeah, and you had mentioned knotweed before. I mean, that is being used to treat cancer and Lyme disease. I mean, it's like, you know, just to think of like just the wealth and to have the, you know, if it's just like anything else, it's like this, it's kind of this otherism, right? Like we see in society. What if we projected the more beautiful aspects of these things, you know, on them, and also like appreciated the fact that how resilient they are. We're trying to
Yes.
create biodiversity, and so, you know, to that effect, if you're like, oh, well, this particular invasive is allelopathic and, you know, will prohibit natives from growing, okay, but man, it also is clearly filling this niche that surely we created. Like you mentioned, it has often longer or different growing seasons than some of the things that we're used to eating, native or annual or whatever. And just like, isn't that beautiful? Don't we want resiliency?
Mhm.
And here comes climate change, you know, and it's coming, and that also is inevitable. So the invasive species are inevitable, their persistence is inevitable, climate change is inevitable, and in that are the things that we're working so hard and using so many resources and efforts and maybe poisons and other things trying to protect. Will they even be able to grow here?
Mm.
And I don't know how many years, and I'm not trying to be, you know, doom and gloom. I'm kind of just, but I am more like, you know, what will happen, but let's like keep the widest possible view while we're heading down the path boldly, and not discounting anything for its usefulness in the whole system.
So tell me how you are incorporating more invasives into your forest farming, into what you are doing on that beautiful piece of property that you're stewarding.
So, you know, just to clarify, I would not say incorporating,
Mm.
just to be safe, right? Because I am not like planting the seed of the multiflora rose or anything like that, right? I'm putting pressure on them in certain areas, but I'm trying to understand their usefulness in others. So the multiflora rose, for example, is very abundant here as well. And, you know, it sticks you as you're trying to walk through the forest. And if you want to get to something that's behind it, you just can't, you know, without injuring yourself. And but it is, I have found so many birds' nests in multiflora rose. And I know that like one of the keys to a resilient farm is biodiversity. And so where else are those, you know, I mean, for all I know that this is the absolute best and most protective place for these types of birds that are building these nests. And I haven't witnessed, because haven't been here long enough, which birds exactly are doing that, you know. But should I remove that place that would that would invite them there? And I also, you know, and I know that these birds are eating insects that I probably don't want to fall out of balance. So it's also a shelter for deer, which, I mentioned is an intense pressure here, but I don't know, if not there, where will they be? Sleeping in my backyard, or in my annual garden. I don't know. So it's more like putting pressure on it in certain places and allowing it to be in others. And I know that, to the blackberry point, it's like they do just kind of take over. But I think there are also ways that we can manage that over time. And one of the biggest things that I intend to incorporate, and I've done some testing with, is the biodynamic peppering. Peppering or ashing, where you burn the seed.
Yep.
The basic idea is that you're using the opposite of the force of birth and creation, which would be water, and you're you're incinerating these seeds at a certain time, and with certain conditions, and then you're spreading that pepper. It's sort of an instruction to the ground.
Right. And so just help us understand that, somebody who's never done peppering or spreading the ashes. So you're taking the seeds of the invasives?
Yes.
So can you just walk us that really quickly and simply?
Yep. Sure. So there are a couple of, and I'll try to include some sort of a reference to this in notes, because Hugh Courtney, as well as Catherine Costellas, both wrote some details about their research with biodynamic peppering, when certain types of plant seeds should be burnt. And it really is typically involving when the sun is in certain constellations. So I'll try to include that information because it can get very detailed. But basically taking the seed or berry with seed in it, and incinerating that. And Steiner, when he talked about the biodynamic peppering, which was first introduced as part of the agriculture course, which is the book Agriculture by Rudolf Steiner, he talked about balance. And he talked about the reason that something is running rampant is because it is out of balance. And if with your intention, your point is to bring balance, well, that is a much more beautiful and acceptable thing to nature than eradication. And so you can actually connect with nature on that level. And so by burning the seed, and you just burn it in a wood fire, you get it very hot. You put the seeds in, and you can take the entire amount of ash that comes out of that fire, and you spread that over the area that you want to impact. I did a test as my sort of class project, or what do you call it, thesis for my biodynamic training, where I applied. I actually burnt the seeds of poison ivy, which, don't try this at home. You're not supposed to burn poison ivy and anywhere near yourself, but I took special precautions. And I did a test plot where I did a couple of different tests. And one of them was the biodynamic peppering. And there was a significant reduction, and that was just on year one. Of the poison ivy growth. It was first all removed from the ground up in both test plots. The other test plot, I planted a species niche replacement of jewelweed, which actually was incredibly effective as well. And we can talk more about that if you like. But there was, I would say, probably about a 20 to 30% reduction, and that's just on year one, from biodynamic peppering with the poison ivy seed incinerated. I'm told that doing it year after year is cumulative. So I intend to experiment a lot more with that here.
That's awesome. I love what you said about clarifying that you don't incorporate them, that you're not planting them, and that you are putting pressure on them, and you're asking the question, how can I include them? And then the next step you're looking at is using biodynamic peppering to eradicate them or lessen them. And I'm wondering, what else, is there anything else that you're including
as part of management?
As management?
Okay, so yeah, let me go back to the goats then. the
Okay.
hand pruners, right? And this also kind of goes back to what I alluded to in the beginning, is that I'm not really into the machinery so much, but handwork. And this is my friend Wilson Alvarez, who does actually work at the Horn Farm Center, designs hand tools for agriculture and for forest work, of which I have many tools. The thing is that disturbances is what we want to create, and disturbance-based regenerative agriculture is actually a very wonderful thing. It requires thought, it requires meditation, it requires really observing something.
Mm.
Machines give us the ability to create very large disturbances on a very large scale, very quickly. And so that's what that bush hog was. And that is like the smallest machine that one can imagine. I mean, you know what I mean? Compared to some of these like gigantic earth diggers and backhoes and things like that. I like hand pruners. So I will go through and I will literally one day, I will decide, you know, the first thing I decide is, what will I replace this with? Because this is filling an ecological niche. This multiflora rose is growing along this riparian area. It's holding the soil together. It has bird nests within it, which is, and praying mantis egg sacs and other things. What will provide that same niche? So the first thing I ever do is say, if I'm going to remove this or put pressure on it, like, what will I replace it with? What was growing here before is a great question to ask before this got here. And so there's one place, for example, that I want to grow elderberry, and I think it would be perfect. It has the perfect amount of sun, perfect amount of moisture. There are rocks for the roots to grow into, and it will also hold the soil. So after I've decided that, and really even prepared to plant that, because I don't want to remove it without being able to put live stakes or something in, I will go through one day and nip off all the tips of the multiflora rose, right? Like basically getting myself to the second layer. By going back home and going to bed and to sleep and going to the astral plane, I've given myself an opportunity to actually like completely reverse that decision, you know, for one. And to even like seek higher wisdoms in terms of like what I've done, you know. If I had done the bush hog, it would all be gone and I wouldn't have even had that opportunity. The second day, I might go back and go a little closer. And even, you know, we know with coppicing and pollardine or whatever, you could probably go all the way down to, you know, just a couple inches and that plant would still grow back, you know, and still be alive, especially this time of year. So really it's a matter of over time. One of the things I love about biodynamics is that whether or not you believe that cosmic energies are being imbued into cow horn manure, or you know, that elementals are being invigorated and helping you with your farming work and helping plants get the nutrients they need from miles away. Whether or not that is the case, the act of doing biodynamics requires you to go places and observe your farm from different perspectives throughout the year. And so if we can do that with the way we manage invasives in that slow observational way, we can actually create small disturbances, or I might call them like micro disturbances or micro interactions, and get wisdom from that as we're doing it. And so I think the answer, the simple answer is, when you ask how I do that, is slowly.
Love it. What about invasives like that spotted? What's the spotted fly you have on your what's that spotted fly? Because we have
spotted lanternfly.
Spotted lanternfly. So tell us about that. How do you?
Yeah, my brief sort of, the picture I have of the spotted lanternfly is the news reports that said, if you see a spotted lanternfly, you got to go and stomp on it, right? And so we all went into this crazy frenzy as this like alien invader was landing in Pennsylvania, started in Harrisburg and kind of worked its way down. Or I don't know, probably started in New York or on the East Coast and kind of worked its way down into the Susquehanna Valley where we live and work. So you really, for a while there, you really have this kind of ridiculous scene of people of all ages and backgrounds just stomping on bugs on the street. And there's just so many thousands of them. And I think that's happened with like stink bugs, and it's happened with other things where they just come in and it's just crazy, right? But then over time, it's not crazy anymore. It's maybe a little cyclical, the numbers dwindle. And what really happens is that, someone who's never eaten a cheeseburger before might be like, what the heck is that, right? But a bird or an insect that's never seen a lanternfly might not realize it's food for a while. And so we now have instances of many different species of birds, and specifically praying mantises, enjoying and munching on the lanternfly. And all of those are really great animals to have around for the most part. So so again, that's balance. And there's this great saying that is, nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. And we are everything has to be right now, and we just lose our minds over something like this. And what ends up happening is we do more damage trying to frantically eradicate something like the lanternfly than the lanternfly is doing. And I apologize if this is triggering to anyone who has like a stone fruit orchard, because I know that they can devastate whole orchards of trees. But at the same time, like, it's inevitable. Like, you cannot stomp on enough lanternflies. You might be able to spray enough poison to kill all the lanternflies, but what are the effects of that in the greater scheme of things? I think we all know how terrible that can be. But there's some other interesting connections. I mean, nature is complex. It's not necessarily complicated, but it's complex. And we know that the honeybee has been having a terrible time in our region. And there's colony collapse, and there's the varroa mite, and there's foul brood, and there's all kinds of things. And I enjoy beekeeping and intend to do it here. I'm not really set up for it yet, but there's actually, I was in Philadelphia watching a performance that my daughter was doing, and we were in this outdoor, this around Christmas time, and it was this like outdoor thing in Love Park that they set up where they had all these little shops, and one of them was a local apiary that was selling lanternfly honey. And so you have like orange blossom honey, and you have wildflower honey, and you have this. So these bees who are actually having a difficult time with the amount of nectar and food they can get, and that might be, it's undoubtedly a contributing factor in a colony collapse, in which, by the way, beekeepers are losing half their colonies every year. Completely it's like the bee equivalent of SIDS or something like that, right? It's just terrible. It's like it's such a terrible surprise. But now these bees have this other food source, which is actually the excrement of the lanternfly.
Interesting.
And so you see these bees, there's been reports of these bees being, around the trees where these lanternflies are congregating, eating the sugars that are coming out of the insects. And it may not be the best tasting thing. It's certainly not what the taste that people are used to, but it is an alternate food source for the struggling honeybee, one of our most important pollinators and biggest collaborators in the natural world as far as agriculture goes.
Wow, Alan, I love your perspective on invasives, and I love the presence that you bring to how nature is complex and not complicated. Yeah, and it's the same with farming and gardening, growing food and connecting with nature. It can feel complex. It's not complicated.
Right.
Is there anything else that you'd like to leave people with when we look at incorporating biodiversity and really working with the invasives that we find happening on on the land that we're working with?
Yeah, and I think it's the same thing that I want to challenge myself with, because I struggle with it. It's just wait and observe. And, you can make a huge impact and it could have been the wrong impact. You can make a little impact and realize the damage before it's too late. Try to understand the value. We have to reframe value in every absolute way. Try to understand the value of every organism, every creature, every component of these natural systems, the niche they're filling, the ecological function they're serving, and if it even matters, right? Is it just for your vanity that you want to remove that? Right? You're talking about your neighbors very kindly, right? But like, is it affecting what you're trying to do? Or is there space for that to do what it wants to do? And what it wants to do is again, filling that niche that we created. We removed functional pieces from nature because of the way we wanted it to look. The only reason that plant is here is A, because we brought it here because of commerce, and B, because it found a niche that we had created, an empty space that it could fill.
Powerful. Powerful. What came to mind when you're talking about redefining things and relooking at things is really it comes down to redefining beauty. And it's like looking at those dandelions in your lawn as an edible lawn, or looking at those dandelions that are growing amongst your in your strawberries, that they're actually a really great compatible plant that actually complements your strawberries.
Yeah, there's some fantastic very short documentaries online about the creation of the lawn and how it's really a new thing in the grand scheme of things. And it was basically brought on to sell lawn equipment. I mean, that story, you hear that story everywhere. NPK was invented to figure out how to sell things to farmers who before that didn't need that kind of stuff, right? And then the next thing you know, it's large tractors and combines and this and that and debt, and it's industries are created, and you have to be sure that the trends that you're going for are not because someone is trying to create an industry.
So true. And Allen, what are you most excited about in your next steps in your farming journey on your 13 acres that you're?
Oh man, that's hard. I'm so excited about so much. I am because I kind of come from a marketing and filmmaking background. I'm kind of excited about, so many farmers have trouble with branding and communicating and things like that. Can I incorporate? It's harder to do for yourself, to be honest, like any of that marketing stuff. It's different than doing it for a client or something, but can the story, the very true story of us, connect with people in a way that they will be inspired to come here to learn some things, to purchase some food and medicine. Can I innovate on that a little bit? And then maybe can I share that with other people who are doing amazing things in the land, but don't really know necessarily how to communicate that story. I'm excited about that. I'm excited, generally speaking, about growing mushrooms, which is something that I'd never done on a scale like this.
What kind of mushrooms are you growing?
Currently, I have shiitake and gray dove oyster, and I'm going to add some more oyster before the winter's up. And I would also like to do lion's mane.
That's awesome.
I've actually found lion's mane, honeys, chicken of the woods, and oyster mushrooms just growing here. It's the absolute perfect place for it. So it's like, it really sings to me,
Wow, that's really cool, Allen. Well, wishing you the absolute best. Thank you so much for your time today and dropping us some of your wisdom from experience and what you've learned along your biodynamic and farming and gardening and permaculture and living journey. I appreciate you.
Oh, it's so sweet to talk to you and so awesome to be part of this. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Big love. You can find Allen online at gnomewoodfarm.com and Instagram at gnomewoodfarm. Fascinating way to look at invasives, isn't it? Putting pressure on them, asking how we can include them, and using biodynamic peppering. I wonder if you already do any of these practices, and if you don't, which one or which ones might you include in your next steps on your farming and gardening journey? Be sure to take pictures, share your stories on social media, and share your stories with your fellow farmers and gardeners, because when we learn together, we grow together. You make yourself an amazing day. Thank you so much for joining us for the Soil Summit. Big love.